Hey, everybody. Sorry for the late. Hi, Nicolette. Hi, Mac.
Hello, Greg.
Hey, had some problems getting in. I'll tell everybody about that. Shouldn't have been this late. Um,
We're on.
We're on.
Hey, Greg, I sent a message to the class telling them to just hold tight for a minute.
Hey, thanks for doing that.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yeah, yes, Manny, you're good. Sorry to be late, Manny. Had a little
No, no
challenge.
worries.
Had a little challenge getting in this.
No,
I
no
want to
problem.
make Brian co-host. There we go. You're now co-host. Jonathan. Hey, Bill, or Bob, would you help us do this? Bob Elysian?
Sure thing.
Can I make you co-host here?
Yeah, and I can admit them.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. Well, oh boy, I'm seeing a lot of familiar faces here. So I see Dale Peterson. Nice to see Dale. Mike Clark. Hey, way to go. Brian Schroer. How about that from? Got it written down.
Indianapolis, Louisville chapter, Columbus, Indiana. Yes.
Okay, glad to have you with us, Brian.
Hi, Greg. How are you doing?
I can't tell who's saying this. Oh, Robert Sargent.
Yes.
Okay.
Hey, Greg, it's Nicolette.
Hey, Nicolette. Hi. Carol Steele. Well, there's a person who's been missing in action here. We missed you last week, Carol. Paul Bogan. Hey, Paul.
Hey.
Let's see.
Bill,
Well, I said we were going to get off on time, but obviously that hasn't happened because I've had a hard time. I'm technologically impaired. So
We're getting there, Greg. We're getting there.
yeah, we are. Thank you. I'll calm down. Geez, I was panicked we wouldn't even get this meeting going. So. Well, let's see. It's 9:35. Let's start. Just to remind people, if you haven't been on big meetings before, and this is not huge, but we have 34 people on, 35 people on. There is a page 2. So if you have the gallery view and thinking you're seeing people, and then you hear a voice, a disembodied voice, you can go to page 2 to see them.
Aren't we all technically disembodied for this? Isn't that the technical term?
It's virtually disembodied. But that would be on page 2, or for those other ones that aren't familiar with Zoom, if you go and get speaker view, you'll always see the speaker. They'll be highlighted and emphasized. The purpose of this program, usually it's for a class for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute that Brian Werner and I co-teach. But I thought it would be great if we could record this, especially with both what Manny has to say, which dovetails nicely into what Roger Kinney has to say, and then several other guest speakers, Ed Henderson and Jeff Kingery. So, but to record it, SABR or Osher Lifelong Learning Institute couldn't, but the director, Barb Ratcliffe, said she was open to having SABR do it. So Paul Parker, our president of Society for American Baseball Research for the Rocky Mountain region, agreed to support this. And then Jacob Pomrenke at SABR said, sure, you can use our email or our Zoom account. We'll record it and then we'll save it on our YouTube account. So this program will be available through SABR on their YouTube account. So the first speaker or person I'm going to interview today is Manny Randhawa. Manny Randhawa is a reporter for MLB. He's a StatCast expert. He and the topic of today is mostly his book Blake Street Bombers. But the first topic, and there's going to be Q&A later, but we will not talk to Manny about this subject, but we'll just ask him, what's the latest that you know on the player-owner negotiations, Manny, and how do you think it's going to turn out?
Well, I know what everybody else knows here. I think, here's my advice on it, because I know everybody on this call is probably a big baseball fan. I would do what we'll get into the book in a minute, but something that Larry Walker told me that I took to heart, and he didn't mean it this way, but he meant it strictly in baseball terms. I asked him how in the world, or what was he thinking? How was he going up to the plate when he was hitting 400 in July of 1997? And he said, well, I don't get too high, I don't get too low. So I would suggest that as a baseball fan, don't get too high and don't get too low when you hear different things about, whether there's going to be a season or not, because honestly, it could all come together in 10 minutes. And so I think that, and my feeling, I don't have any inside information on this, but my feeling is it will. I think we're going to have baseball season. One way or another, the commissioner, as you probably know, can implement, a 50-game season or whatever anyway. Even if there is no agreement, he can unilaterally implement that, and players that want to play can play. So I think one way or the other, we will see Major League Baseball this season.
Okay, thank you. Dan Evans, wired in superhero here. Danny, do you have any insight into this?
I think, Greg, until there's a deadline and until they're in the same room, there will be no deal.
Okay.
Once there is, there will.
All right. And just to confirm one thing before we go on, my understanding is while the commissioner can institute the 50-game season, the players have to agree to the expanded playoffs. So if the commissioner were to do that and the players wouldn't do that, they wouldn't get all that extra TV revenue from the expanded playoffs, which is
Right, that's a good point.
It's a big control item. Okay. Well, knowing disappointing that it hasn't been set up, I think it would have been great to be playing by July 4th, but I guess we all sure hope there's a season. Now on to the main topic, Blake Street Bombers. Manny, you didn't come from here. What got you interested in the Blake Street Bombers?
Well, when I moved here in 2016. I've been covering Major League Baseball since 2013. And when I got here, I started covering the Rockies, and SABR was doing a 25th anniversary book about the Rockies, kind of just putting together different chapters on different players that were important in franchise history and different games that were important, et cetera. Paul Parker, who's on this call, co-edited that with Bill Nolan. And I had Dante Bichette. So it turned out to be a great blessing to have Dante, because I was able to, he's number one, he's a baseball geek, as many of you probably know. He loves the game. He will talk to you about baseball for hours on end and not want to hang up, which is awesome. Not that I wanted to, but we probably talked for altogether 9 or 10 hours just for that chapter.
Wow.
Yeah, and so toward the end of it, I said, "This has been so great," and it just hit me that I'd never seen a book about not only Bichette, but the Blake Street Bombers, and it was coming up on 2020. That was 2018, winter of 2017, and 25 years afterwards, and there's no real single book dedicated entirely to the Blake Street Bombers, not like a chapter in a Rockies history
So
book.
you thought this was really iconic, and it was worth telling the story. And that's
So I asked him, and he said, "Let's do it," and he's where it started.
That's great. Now, I have to tell something to Brian or Bob Illusion. I have, I think, 3 or 4 people that have joined our typical class meeting. Could you guys, Brian, could you start that meeting or let them know? Ed Mazurko asked me, one of you guys has to go into our typical class meeting. They apparently didn't get the message as to where to join this class. Sound all right?
Yeah. Bob, is that something you know how to do?
Sorry for the interruption, folks. We got 3 people that I'd really.
I guess I'll have to get out of this meeting, then rejoin it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. Okay, let's see if I can.
Or text, or do you have Ed Mazurko's?
No, I don't have any of their addresses.
Just open another browser.
Yeah, I could do that too.
That'll probably be safer, so if there's not enough spots on this one, you don't get kicked off.
Nicolette to the rescue.
Okay, I'll try.
Thanks,
All right.
guys.
But Brian, you might try to work it too. You have a class list somewhere. Okay. And all right, we'll go on. I'm sorry, Manny. I just would like 3 people not to be totally lost. So Bichette was your starting point, and you then interviewed the other 4. Why don't you give us? Pardon?
Nobody can find Andre Scalaraga. Not even his publicist.
So the part, it's interesting. I read the part about Galarraga's early years, and it didn't occur to me that he wasn't quoted the way the other guys were.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good, because then that means the book flowed well.
Oh yeah,
Manny.
By the way,
Manny,
I highly recommend it. Here it is, Blake Street Bombers by Manny Randhawa. So mention the guys who are included, and then how you structured the book, because I found the way that you basically put the book into 3 parts very interesting.
Yeah, so I had everyone but Galarraga. That includes Larry Walker, Ellis Burks, and Vinny Castilla, in addition to Dante Bichette. A lot of people don't put Ellis Burks in there.
Oh, yeah.
But he absolutely belongs in there, and the book, if you read the book, you'll see exactly why. And the structure is because it's kind of tricky, because I wanted to tell the life story of all these guys, not just their Blake Street Bombers years. So basically, you have what I did was part 1 was before the Bombers, part 2 is the Blake Street Bombers, and part 3 is beyond the Bombers. So after what they're doing, what they did after they left Colorado, in terms of baseball, and also in terms of now, all the way up to today. So that's how I kind of structured it, because I wanted to make sure to get in their backstory as well.
And so the first third is, or the first part is each person telling their stories, getting up to not only to the major leagues, but up to playing with the Rockies, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then the next part is structured totally differently in a sense.
Right.
It's by year, starting, and the year that the Blake Street Bombers started was 1995.
95, yep.
And then you have each year as to what their contributions were. And of course, there were some ups and downs with the players until the Bombers disappeared, basically, except for Larry Walker. And those years, how long were they together?
Well, they were really only together all 5 of them until let's see, for 95 and 96, all 5 of them, because Andre Scalaraga, Todd Helton was coming up, so they let Andre Scalaraga go. And he became a free agent. And he went to Atlanta and had some great years. Arguably, the best years of his career in Atlanta. Before he got the cancer diagnosis. So really, 95 and 96 was the heyday that they were all together. Then the other four were together until 98, when Ellis Burks was traded to the Giants midseason, literally in the middle of a game while he was at Wrigley Field in center field. Somebody came out. I don't remember.
Story.
Yeah, I don't remember who came out there. Goodwin, I think Curtis Goodwin, maybe.
I think that's right.
Came out there and he said, and Ellis is like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "You've been traded, fool." And just like that. And he said, so then he ran in and, he was glad, he was so sad to leave, but he's glad it was the Giants because they were in the pennant race. And then Dante was traded in off season 99 after the 99 season. And then Benny also that off season.
Okay. I think I want to start one story and then I might have to text somebody or something. So, because it appears that we're having trouble getting the message to our folks. Something that many of you may not know, or maybe you do, Manny took a specific interest in Larry Walker. Thought at the end of your book, by the way, then after you do all those seasons, then you take each of these people, and then you have a part where you say, here's the case for Larry Walker to get in the Hall of Fame. Yep. And 2 years ago, is it 1.5 years ago now? Or is it just last year? I mean, I'm losing track of time. That you started
for the Walker thing, yeah. I mean, I started getting involved with it, really 2 years ago, but most of that was just, Twitter advocacy. It got serious last year.
And what you did with the help of Wayne Hagan, who was the namer or the part of the naming of the Blake Street Bombers, along with, was it Bichette or Castilla?
Yeah, Dante actually was the one who told me that it was him and Wayne.
Hagan. Hagan was, of course, for all of you folks, one of the first announcers, radio. And wasn't he on radio? I wasn't here.
Yeah, he was KOA. He was the first voice of the Rockies on KOA.
Well, he and Jeff Kingery.
And Jeff Kingery, yeah.
I mean,
well, he was the play-by-play. Yeah. I mean, I guess they switched off. Yeah.
And so you had Hagan supporting you. We had a meeting for the SABR group. You presented the information along with Dan Evans. And folks, if you don't know Dan Evans was a former GM of the Dodgers, assistant GM of the White Sox, and has had some important scouting roles. He was an agent and is currently running the Field of Dreams games. And you and Dan basically put Walker over the top. So, and that's I think fact, because all of you know that Walker ends up with setting a record for the most increase in his 10th year or last year on the ballot, 22%, and went from nowhere really after year 8 to then getting close enough to be considered, and then you guys put him over, and it was your efforts that made the difference. So what I want to do now is allow some Q&A. And either electronic, it would help if you know how to electronically put up your hand. And Brian, if you can handle the Q&A here for a second, I'm going to try to let those other folks in.
Be happy to.
Okay, so we're looking for questions about the Blake Street Bombers, any of the individuals, how they got together, what their best year was. I mean, that would be a good starting.
James,
take it away, Brian, and I'll try to fix another problem.
Yeah, James, you have a question. You can unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for Dan Evans in regards to the Field of Dreams game in August. Dan, I was wondering if you could let us know if the game is still going to be played and when the tickets might be put up for availability. I have put in for the drawing, but I have not heard anything. Thanks.
Dan, why don't you answer that real quick, and then we'll get back to Blake Street Bombers.
Okay, well, the August 13th,
You're breaking up real
Dan,
bad.
hey, Dan, we're having problems. James, we'll get the information.
Candy.
According to Wikipedia, August 13th is 240th day of the year in Gregorian calendar.
Yeah,
140 days.
Dan, we're having trouble with that. So James, what we'll do is we'll find the information. We'll post it on the SABR site and make sure that everybody has it, okay?
That's great.
Dan, you're
Thank
kind of coming in and out today.
In regards to the game, like every game in the 2020 season, it's in limbo right now until the agreement is reached. We fully expect to play. When it comes to the tickets, James, that's a Major League Baseball Chicago White Sox deal, and that has nothing to do with the Field of Dreams. We don't coordinate the seating. So just follow the White Sox website, follow the MLB website.
Great.
Sounds
Thank you.
good. Hey, Carol, you have your hand up. You have a question for Manny?
Yes. I'm sorry to say I've not read the book yet, but I will.
Great, thank you.
What do you think were the primary reasons why the Blake Street Bombers bonded together so well as a group?
I would say it's the personalities, and I hope that comes through for those of you who read the book and are going to, that the personalities of these guys, they just meshed so well. You know, I talked to a lot of guys who weren't part of the Bombers, you know, Eric Young and Walt Weiss and some other people as well, and they said the same thing. These guys were meant to be together for that period of time. It's too bad that they weren't there longer. You know, Dante is as studious as they come. You know, people look at him, you know, the broader baseball world looks at him and they think, you know, course creation, brawny guy, you know, he can hit the ball a mile, but only when he actually makes contact with it. But, you know, he's a guy that was about as studious as they come. I mean, he was very Tony Gwynn-esque in terms of videotapes, and he devoured literature. And Ted Williams and Charlie Lau and other hitting greats in terms of teaching hitting. And Ellis Burks, I always thought before I went into this that he was kind of the quiet, put your head down and play guy. He is very, very talkative. He remembers everything, and he's hilarious, and he's great. He's got a great personality. And Danny knows a lot of these guys as well. Danny was actually Dante's final general manager, and you'll read about that in the book as well. Larry is just he's funny. I mean, he's one of the funniest people I've ever met in my life. His wit is incredible, and he's just a natural talent. I mean, he's about as close as Wayne Hagen put in the foreword to this book. He's about as close to the natural as I've ever seen, Wayne said, because he does everything so well. Vinny Castilla is Cuz. Everybody calls him Cuz because he calls everybody else Cuz, and always has a giant smile on his face. You'll see him out there right now because he's a coach. He's always out there. He'll jump in the batting cage once in a while. He's like a pinball. He's bouncing around everywhere. He's got great energy. They just mesh well together because of their personalities, I think.
Great.
Thank you.
Manny, I have a question. You said
Yeah.
that you couldn't find Andres, which makes me feel a little better because I wrote the bio in the book and I couldn't find
Yeah.
him either.
Yeah.
Has he disappeared, or do we know?
I think Andres, as you all know, he's maybe the most beloved Rocky of all time, and he is he's from all accounts a great has a great personality, very nice man, kind man, courageous man. Overcame 2 bouts of cancer and got back to baseball both times. And I think he's just private. I don't think he. I know. I talk with his publicist a lot. I think he's just a private guy. I went down to Florida to see Dante and Larry, as part of the book research. And then when I got back, somebody said, you should have just gone. You should have just hopped golf course to golf course, and you probably would have found Andres there somewhere. But no luck. Hopefully, down the road we can do something with him.
Galarraga's career always fascinated me in the tremendous ups and downs it had.
Yeah.
I mean, it as much. I mean, he has huge year in Montreal. Then he eventually goes to being unproductive. Comes here, has huge years, goes through again not being productive, then goes back to huge years, and those years are big years.
Yeah, if if he had put together a few more of those, he'd be in Hall of Fame consideration, you know, especially because of what he did when he left here. You know, he had some huge seasons when he left, you know, after he left here, and he kind of proving that he wasn't just a Coors guy. And in the year that he hit 370, I think he hit like 345 on the road or something. So
we finally got our folks on. Welcome to everybody. But a question
Welcome.
I would have, and maybe that was the question that was asked while I was gone, but what did you think were maybe the two most compelling things about Walker's career? I know the one in my mind that was most compelling, but what did you think were the most compelling to make him a Hall of Fame candidate? Not the entire list, but just the great numbers.
Right. It depends on, you know, what type of what you're looking at. We had to really, you know, really
Hold up a
twist
second.
some arms.
I'm going to ask everybody to mute who's in the audience.
I'm working on it, Greg. I think we have.
Okay. Go ahead, Manny.
We had to twist a lot of arms.
Oh, you just muted.
We had to twist a lot of arms to get folks to look past the surface level stats, because, you know, he didn't have 3,000 hits, he didn't have 500 home runs, which to me are arbitrary numbers that we like because they're round, and that's how we put people in the Hall of Fame. The one number for me, I think, was his wins above replacement, which is basically, if you got hurt, how many wins would your team lose in a season if you got hurt and your replacement had to replace you out of AAA? So the number of wins that he had over his replacement over his career was 72.7. And during the time he played from 1989 to 2005, there were only 4 guys who had a better figure there: Barry Bonds, Ken Griffey Jr., Jeff Bagwell, and Alex Rodriguez, and then Larry Walker. So, you know, if you can't put that guy in the Hall of Fame, you know, the question becomes what Rocky could ever make the Hall of Fame.
Yeah. And wins above replacement is park adjusted.
Park adjusted, yeah, it's important to mention. Thank you for that. It's park adjusted and league adjusted to the offensive environment of your ballpark and your league every year. So all of that is stripping out Coors Field. His OPS on the road was 865. So take out Coors Field entirely, which isn't fair either because he played baseball there. Take out Coors Field entirely, and his career OPS was higher than Ken Griffey Jr.'s.
That's the stat. Ken Griffey Jr., as I remember, got 99.7% of the votes. And he's got higher away OPS than Griffey Jr. does. Just extraordinary, I think, and really, really good evidence. I'm looking for other questions if there are any. Yeah, Mac, can you unmute yourself?
Manny, Dante's got 2 sons that are playing baseball. What's the upside on them? Are they going to be as good as he was?
Yeah, I mean, I talked to Bo for the book. He's in there. He is already a star, and he's going to be a star. This kid has, and I say that not just because of his talent. He set some records last year when he came up for a rookie, and in terms of, I think, consecutive games with extra base hits. And I remember when he was setting those records, we were getting the numbers, and he had passed. I think he set the all-time record for a rookie for most consecutive games with a double, most consecutive games with an extra base hit. One of them he passed Ted Williams in that from 1939, I guess. I texted Dante, who was there, obviously watching at the game, you know, wherever Bo was. And I said, hey, he's setting this record and this record. He's like, okay, yeah, I'm just trying to take it in, we'll take it one at bat at a time. And he's kind of, trying to, keep his dad pride, in there, in check. And then I texted him later, actually, this one was a Ted Williams record. And I mean, he reveres Ted Williams, and he said, okay, now we're in some serious territory here, because Bo's broken a Ted Williams record. And Bo's, maturity at his age, 21, is tremendous, and I think that's because of his parents. Dante and Mariana are very They're amazing parents for him and for Dante Jr. Dante Jr. I think he's been bouncing around a little bit. I'm not sure what organization he's in. I think he might have been in the Nationals organization the last time. I'm not sure. But Bo Bichette is one of the cornerstone, along with Vlad Guerrero Jr., one of the cornerstone stars, I should say, or cornerstone group of the Toronto Blue Jays of the future. And if he doesn't get hurt, he could have a Hall of Fame career.
Yeah, but Bo Jr. is got a tremendous career ahead of him. If a lot of things have to go right, hurt and keeping your head on straight, and just
right.
lots of things, and it's hard to keep up those skills. So.
Yeah. By the way, I'll throw in, and I think he also hit 2 homers off Clayton Kershaw last year too. At least one. I know he had at least one, but maybe 2. So.
Thanks, Mac.
Thanks for the question.
If there are other questions, I don't know. Or John, are you wanting to ask a question?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, John.
Hi. Manny, what is Vinny's exact title with the Rockies? Is he like a special advisor? And I never knew.
Yeah, I think he's technically a special assistant to the general manager. And so I think, most of the Bombers have come back through here in one form or another. Dante was a hitting coach, I think in 2013. Ellis Burks came back through here as a hitting coach. Ellis is now a special advisor or a special assistant to the GM in San Francisco. He played there a little bit. And so he's still in the game as well. And Dante did one season, and then he said, I got to go back to my boys. He really wanted to get back, and because his boys are developmentally in baseball, they were really at a pivotal point. And I think he made the right decision based on what we've seen from Bo now. And so Vinny's a special assistant to the GM. And he's always, that's how I put his part together was, after BP, we just sat in the dugout and talked after BP, because he's, like I said, he's so energetic. He takes the throws from Nolan, over at first base when they're taking ground balls and, and BP and stuff. So, so that was a lot of fun. It was enjoyable, and hopefully he'll be there for a long time to come.
One thing I drew from your book, Manny, was that you ended up liking and respecting these guys.
Absolutely. Each and every one of them, even Andres, what I learned about his life, not just his career, but his life, it's pretty amazing what he was able to do and go through. And, you asked the first question you asked, I think, Greg, was, what got me into this? Well, the chapter on Dante did, but once I started digging into the numbers, that's what got me going on Walker. And, it was terribly unfair, for him not to be in. And I still kind of can't believe it happened, but, everything just fell the right way. Thanks in great part to Dan Evans as well for, the connections that he had in terms of getting the word out. And so, all of these guys, they deserve to be celebrated. It's too bad about, for much more serious reasons than this, it's too bad about the coronavirus and everything that's happened this year, but we were planning to have some celebratory events with the guys, here in Denver, book signings and things like that. So, next year, hopefully we'll do that next year. I think these guys deserve their due, as the first faces of the franchise. They gave this Rockies franchise an identity from the beginning. And when you say Blake Street Bombers around baseball, wherever you go, people know you're talking about the Rockies because of those guys.
It is an identifying characteristic for sure. And I would thank you. I enjoyed reading your book.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
And you told me how people could get it, but I don't have that in front of me right now.
Yeah, right there.
Right.
BSB 25. Can you guys see that on my background?
Can't read it real well because
it's BSB. So Blake Street Bombers is BSB 25.com, since this is their 25th.
BSB25.com. And I would guess that people might be able to get it signed somehow.
Absolutely. If you want it signed, get in touch with me directly. I'll just send you a sign. I'll send it out signed to you, and we can figure that out. Usually what people do is they just Venmo. I don't know if you guys know about Venmo and how you can just transfer money pretty quick on your phone online. But yeah, I can send them out to you that way.
Okay.
Instead of you having to buy it and then get it and send it to me and so.
And
I'd
I
be happy.
suppose an extra cool thing would be that if people either bought it later or even bought it now, and you have those group book signings, they might be able to get somebody else's signature.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
We're still going to try that next year. And obviously Larry's going to go into the Hall of Fame next year. So, if anybody's going to be in Cooperstown, that's going to be a fun time as well. We might do something around that too.
Okay. Thank you so much, Manny.
Thank you. And if you don't mind, I'll hang out because I want to hear the next panel. That'd be great.
All right. I'd love to have you. Love to have you hang on.
Great.
So, I appreciate Manny doing that. I tell you, Manny has, he and I have not spent enough time talking about his StatCast work because he understands stats in a way that certainly most of us don't. And certainly that's on the cutting edge of what's happening in baseball and influencing how the game is managed and played. The next part of this is a discussion about how Colorado, in particular Denver for most of the years, just Denver, but that's not the way it eventually ended up, tried to get a Major League Baseball team, how that went on for over 30 years without success, how there were promises made, how close it came and didn't happen, and then how eventually it did. Now I lived here a couple of years in the late 70s. My wife going to medical school kind of took us away. I came back once in the 80s. There was the Denver Baseball Commission. I met with Steve Kadich, the director of that at the time, hoping that I could somehow work in baseball. They didn't have money to hire people, and I'm sure there were a lot of people that would have been in front of me. And then we had to leave and came back in retirement in 2010. But that whole story ended up fascinating me. And in the Osher Lifelong Institute volunteer teaching that I've done, and Brian's joined me this year, I once ran a class that ran 10 hours, 5 2-hour sessions on this. So putting it into a compact 80 minutes or so is a challenge. But our first panelist, who will stay with us the whole time, Roger Kinney and I, along with Irv Moss, who was terrific. We were at History Colorado, did a program, and we covered quite a bit. Of course, the thing we miss without Irv is the firsthand observation of what was going on, because he was with the Post for 60 years. So I want to introduce Brian Kinney, and unfortunately for me, Brian's on my second page, and I'll remind people that there are 2 pages here. So if you want to see a different speaker, at least on my computer, you go to the middle of, in a vertical sense, the middle of the screen, and then go to the far right hand or left hand side, and you can change page from 1 to 2. Or if you want to see whoever's speaking, you can just put it on speaker view. So Roger, you started out, I guess, your baseball career higher level with the University of Colorado, and you were a 3-time letter winner, which is the most you could be, right? Because you couldn't, freshman couldn't play. Right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, freshman couldn't play. I'm going to read a couple things about your background because while my class got this, the other SABR people didn't. But I just want to go over. You're the past president of the Colorado Sports Hall of Fame, the first employee of the Colorado Rockies. We'll talk about that, where you were director of community relations and executive director of the Colorado Rockies Baseball Club Foundation. In a wonderful book, and I know this doesn't work very well, but this is called Time for Expansion Baseball. It's a SABR publication. You write a terrific article about what we're going to talk about today. Really well done and well footnoted. If any of you are familiar with SABR books, you got to footnote the heck out of them. I mean, and so these are legitimate research projects, and you did that. And you also wrote a book, and I'll give a shout out to Paul Parker, president of Rocky Mountain SABR. This was a book, Major League Baseball, A Mile High, that Paul co-edited with Bill Nowlin of SABR. And you wrote a significant article on that too. So I enjoyed both of them. Among your other achievements that aren't relevant to today's topic, you chaired the committee to get and host the Final Four in Denver in what year?
1990.
How wonderful. Right about the same time. And the one thing I didn't mention, you were director of the Colorado Baseball Commission after serving on the board of the Metropolitan Stadium Authority. So put in summary, the Colorado Baseball Commission was charged with the responsibility of trying to attract Major League Baseball here. Is that correct?
That was our assignment, all right. That's right.
Yeah. So we will get to that. But our starting point, and I'm going to ask everybody again to, I see one or two people that aren't muted. If you'd mute, and then we'll call on you. But for the next 45 minutes, it's sort of going to be a panel presentation as our other people join us. Let's go back to just, Denver had a long baseball history, but Denver didn't have baseball during the war. Leagues dissipated at that time. And right after the war, was it the Nicholson family that started the team, and then that was bought out by the Housen family? Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. Can you imagine after World War II bringing professional baseball back to Denver? And Will Nicholson Sr. and his brother, and I think it was Claude Betcher, and I think probably A.B. Hirschfeld Sr. Probably were involved in that group. But anyway, they brought professional baseball back, and of course they played out at Merchants Park, and that led to the time when they decided to sell, and the Housen family, led by Bob Housen and his father-in-law, put together a group, kind of family related, and so they bought the team. And that led, as you say, we're kind of condensing years, but at any rate, I've always felt that 1959 was kind of a key year in our road anyway to get a Major League Baseball team. A couple things happened in 59. One was the meeting, or the friendship developed between Housen and Branch Rickey. And the other thing was the success of the Bears. The Housens were running the Bears, and Bob Housen, one of the good things he did even early on was to buy the franchise from Kansas City, which meant that the Bears were a Yankees farm team. And in those days, the Yankees, of course, had a very good farm team. Could have probably played in the major leagues. But with Kubek and Richardson, a whole bunch of players that, of course, eventually had great seasons in the majors, the Bears were doing very well. They were not only doing well on the field, but they were making money and looked very promising. So Bob Housen, with his father-in-law, created a plan anyway. And with that plan, which was really to bring Major League Baseball to Colorado and to Denver, they decided to call Branch Rickey because other things were going on then. As you know, prior year, the Dodgers and the Giants had moved to California. Excuse me. So Branch Rickey was working with Bill Shea. Bill Shea, of course, wanted to bring another team to New York. And in the mix of all that, the friendship developed between the Housens and Branch Rickey, and that led to Denver's involvement and their involvement in the creation of the Continental League.
Well, I want to go back here for a second, Roger.
Okay.
You mentioned his father-in-law, and I suspect some people know this, but others don't. Tell them who the father-in-law was and what his background was that made him particularly, he had pull in some way.
Yes, he did. Very popular politician in Colorado. Matter of fact, he was the governor of the state. But at that time, excuse me, he was a senator in the U.S. Senate, and he had widespread influence and friendships, not only in the Senate but throughout baseball. When he got involved with Branch Rickey, then it led to friendships with the owners of the other teams, the major league owners, but also with cities that were interested in attracting Major League Baseball to their towns as well.
We didn't mention his name. His name was Ed Johnson, or Big Ed Johnson. But Big Ed was a two-time governor, then a two-time senator, then came back and was governor again. Now that's an awesome political career. And just to throw in this little sidelight, Eisenhower, of course, was responsible for the interstate program, the interstate highway program. But when they blasted a hole and through the mountain for I-70, they called it the Eisenhower Tunnel. And there were some people, it was the political muscle of and efforts of Ed Johnson, some people think, that made that happen. So now when you see the Eisenhower-Johnson Tunnel, when they made the second tunnel, that the Johnson is for Big Ed Johnson, and that was Bob Howsam's father-in-law. So the Continental League is proposed. Branch Rickey is the guy with the political or the connections. He's revered. Branch Rickey started, had a fantastic career going back into the 20s as a baseball guru, starting spring training, starting farm systems, brings Jackie Robinson up in the 40s, and now is proposing a second league. And there's political will to make that kind of thing happen. As you say, New York just lost 2 teams, and they think maybe they deserve another team. And there's a lot of other cities. Baseball had never expanded. And so Branch thinks he's got 8 cities lined up, and I bet we could almost name them if we tried, huh? But
well, we sure could, and we can, and that 7 out of the 8, of course, over a period of time now have teams. But part of that story too was involved that when it was turned down, the Kefauver bill, which was passed, really put an end to it. But the agreement was, when that happened, according to Bob Howsam and the others, was that all 8 of the teams that were originally in the Continental League would eventually have teams or have representation for Major League Baseball in their cities.
And a lot of that happened within the next 10 years. I guess 5 of those cities, maybe at least 4 of those cities got their teams. But when we get to the 80s, only 2 cities remained from that group that hadn't been accepted, and that's Denver and Buffalo. And I'm afraid Buffalo's never going to have that promise fulfilled. But so here we were, one of the 2 cities without. Now, before we run that string out, I just, for those who don't know, so Bob Howsam, to try to make his dream come true, had originally built Bears Stadium and then increased Bears Stadium to have a capacity. Now he's put money into this, but when Major League Baseball says we'll expand and just cut the legs out from underneath the Continental League by expanding, Bob doesn't have anybody to play in that or play enough in that big stadium. So he takes a flyer, I think his lead guy, for a 7 or 8 man group, and buys a kind of an obscure hope football team from the American Football League, and they decide to call it the Denver Broncos. So for 1 year, he is the lead guy, but he really liked baseball, so he left baseball. What did he do after that, Roger?
Well, you're right. His heart was really in baseball. And that's shown throughout his lifetime, his career. And as you say, when that happened, he sold his interest in the Broncos, and he went to St. Louis to become affiliated and general manager of the Cardinals. So he had a lot of success anyway. In St. Louis, they won the championship in the World Series, and then in time he left there and went to Cincinnati, where he really even improved upon his success and won, and was known for, of course, the Big Red Machine. So he remained in baseball throughout that period of time. And one of the things that always struck me about Bob, even after the success he had and when he had reached retirement age and what have you, that he came back to Colorado and helped us when the situation developed and we got serious about the invitation to enter the major league.
Yeah, and he, of course, had a lot of baseball connections, which, you ended up with some other people with baseball connections, but Howson, of course, had him at the highest level. And Bob, just to be clear on the timing, joined the Cardinals in mid-'64 when they weren't doing well. If folks remember what happened in mid-'64 or at the end of the year in '64, the famous Philadelphia Phillies collapse, and the Cardinals sort of get in, maybe not, a little luckily, but then end up in a fabulous 7-game World Series with the Yankees winning. Bob didn't create that team. He didn't win the next 2 years. So I believe he was encouraged to leave, if not fired. But think of what happened. Then he did have a lot to do with the next 2 teams, 67 and 68, that went to the World Series. And of course, he doesn't get winning one against the Red Sox and losing one against the Tigers. He doesn't get enough credit for those teams. Then he goes, as you say, to the Reds and has a fabulous run with the Reds in the mid to late 70s. And then eventually that peters out, but then he came back to Denver. So after, what's your memory of what happened then between the early 60s and, let's say, 1976 or 7? Next dozen years, anything going on here?
Well, yes. We're reminded that the lead, anyway, for our efforts to get a major league team really were centered around the ownership of the team, of the Bears, while they were in progress. And the Howsams had sold their interest to the Phipps family. Jerry Phipps hired Jim Burris to be the general manager. And so they tried to keep Denver in the forefront whenever a question came up about the potential of having a city. But it had its ups and downs. And even as a sports community, we had our ups and downs. But that led to a period of time when Jim Burris used to say that he'd go to the winter meetings, and the Denver delegation really didn't have some of the presentations that some of the others did. But they kind of kept the fires going. We did have a Denver Metropolitan Sports Committee, which was led by Larry Varnell to a large extent, and the members of the Chamber of Commerce. They took the forefront and attended some of the meetings. And then the Denver Baseball Commission also supported some of the efforts, especially when the Phipps family eventually sold out to John DeQ and his family. So there was a period of times of ups and downs, and to a period of time when we came close, we thought a few times, when Marvin Davis was leaving.
Well, let's look at the 70s for a second. And I want to introduce the other 2 people on our panel, even though they may have a little time to go before they have their contributions. But Jeff Kingery, you are on my screen, and Ed Henderson is too. Jeff Kingery was, just briefly tell him, I mean, you didn't only do baseball, Jeff, you did other things. Can you just briefly tell folks what your background there was? You're muted, Jeff. Can we unmute Jeff?
We'll try.
Yeah. Jeff, you're unmute. You're muted.
KOA radio for 11 seasons. pretty much, as far as I was concerned, the golden era of the NBA, because you had Bird, you had Magic, you had Dominique Wilkins, you had Kareem, you had Jordan coming into the league. So it was a very special time for me to do that. But in '92, when we knew we were going to have the Rockies, KOA said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Guys, that's really a no-brainer. You know, baseball is my favorite sport. We got a brand new team starting up. I want to do the Rockies." And so, of course, in '93, when the Rockies started, I was fortunately one of the 2 radio broadcasters to do them.
And then you stayed with them for 17 years.
Yeah, a lot of fun. And, you know, you didn't have many winning seasons, but the ones that were winners were incredibly special. I'm sure we'll get into that as we go along.
We'll get into at least the first incredibly special team, maybe not the others. You were muted a little bit at the beginning, but you did also announce for the Bears. We didn't hear that. Can you tell
my
us
first,
when that was?
First year in Denver was doing the Denver Bears. It was the 1981 team. They were affiliated with the Montreal Expos. So I got to know Bob Gebhardt pretty well before Geb ever came into the scene as the GM with the Rockies. It was a very special team. They actually won the American Association Championship that year in 1981. Had a lot of players that went on to the big leagues like Terry Francona and Brad Mills. We had Bryn Smith. We had some terrific veteran major leaguers that I wouldn't say were on the way down, but they were fantastic guys to have on a AAA club to help the younger guys who were coming up. Guys like John Briggs or John Hale and Danny Briggs, just special guys that I don't think the Bears could have won that championship without them.
Sure. And for some of you who weren't in our class the year before, some of you are remembering some of the great Expo prospects, and you're wondering why Jeff didn't mention them. Well, they had just gone up, and that 1980 team, Brian, you suggested was one of the best minor league teams ever, possibly not recognized for it because they didn't win the playoffs to win the championship, even though their regular season, Brian, what was that, 94 and 40?
92 and 44.
92 and 44.
That's not a bad record.
Fabulous. And that's the Tim Raines team and the
Tim Wallach.
Tim Wallach. And so, yeah, some really, really good players, which lead on them to be an excellent Expos team. Our other person, and Ed, you'll need to unmute here, is Ed Henderson. Ed, you've been a scout for darn near forever, right?
It sure feels like it. Yeah, it certainly does. Yeah, starting back in 1994, but a baseball fan long before that. And I got to tell you, it's great to see you guys today. I haven't shaved. I hope you noticed that, Greg. My wife made me shave last night, so.
Oh, you look so much better, Ed. That's good. I saw Ed yesterday, and looking a little rough there. So he's now looking sharp.
All right, thank you.
So you still scout for the Twins, right?
Yep, I'm in my, I think, 12th to 13th year with the Twins, and before that, the Pittsburgh Pirates, and before that, the Florida Marlins. So it's been a nice run.
And people can hear you. This is your plug, Ed, on radio occasionally, right?
Yeah, 850 KOA. Thrilled to get a chance to be the what they call the baseball insider over there, and working with Mike Rice and the folks on Colorado's Morning News, and then I do some other radio stuff around the state as well.
Now, you told me you did something in 1977 about fans' interest in baseball. Is that about right?
Yeah, I think it actually, Greg, started probably in 76, maybe 75, 76. And there was a, you could see momentum starting to build, and certainly a very strong desire among the fans here for a major league team to be relocated or certainly expanded to the city of Denver. And so several people and myself formed a very small grassroots organization called the Colorado Committee for Major League Baseball. We were only in existence probably for about 2, maybe 2.5 years. You know, and really essentially what it was an effort to try to get a lot of the fans to start to put pressure on MLB by writing letters and making contacts and so forth. So again, it was very grassroots and certainly a predecessor to the great work that Steve Kadish, Don Hinchy, and Roger Kinney did later with the Denver and later Colorado Baseball Commission.
Okay. And that sort of leads us into, and Roger might be the best person to talk more about this, but certainly Jeff and Ed, whenever you want to say something, chime in, okay? I want to now talk about Marvin Davis, and oh so close. In fact, so close that some people said it happened in one of the papers we won't name. So Roger, tell us what you know about Marvin Davis.
Well, Marvin Davis, right off the bat, he was picked in a sense because he financially was willing to do it. He had the wherewithal to be an owner. He knew a number of them. He walked in those circles anyway. So every time that a possibility came up there for a period of time, we always looked to Marvin Davis to be the potential owner. Matter of fact, on one occasion, he too kept kind of private on some of his affairs, but he asked Larry Varnell, who was very active with him and with some of the other movements of the Denver community, the business community anyway. He asked Larry to be his spokesman anyway for some of the things. And so many different options or possibilities came up that at one time, Marvin Davis was reported to say, Larry, you find the team and the willingness for them to come to Denver. And he said, I'll write the check. So we all felt that he was ready, willing, and able, and just had to put everything else together to make it happen. But unfortunately, one thing after another, every time one of those opportunities came up, there were other circumstances which prevented him from coming to Denver. So it got very frustrating and very disappointing because we were led to the altar so many times, but it just didn't happen with Marvin Davis.
1978 was the closest one, the best I understand. There was also a close time in 1980, and then there was talk, and I don't know how close it came a couple of other times later on in the 80s. But the 78 deal, as I understand, hinged on, they had hoped that the Oakland Coliseum people were going to let Charlie Finley out of the lease. But of course, Charlie was not the easiest guy to get along with. And those discussions didn't work. And they finally said to Charlie, no, we want you to pay for I think he had at least 10, but 20 stands in my mind, years left on his lease with the Oakland Coliseum. And so he and Davis and Finley had agreed on a price. But then the question, Finley wanted Davis to pay for the rest of the lease obligations. And it was in the millions. I mean, we're not talking small change here, but maybe small change in the whole thing. I almost thought, from what I read, it became a thing of principle. Charlie thought Marvin ought to pay for it, and Marvin thought Charlie ought to pay for it, and that's what sunk the deal. Now, is that right, or is that?
Well, I think that's accurate. And unfortunately, circumstances like that seem to occur every time we got very close. It got so close that even people thought that it was a done deal, but actually, they didn't work out in the end because just a matter of principle, they couldn't agree.
That was a period where I was here those couple of years. And my sense was that that's even spurred more interest in people here to get a Major League Baseball team. And as the Bears are still doing well, have those great teams early in the 80s with the Expos. And so I don't know whether anything happened in the early 80s, but starting in the mid 80s, another effort is tried, right?
Well, that's right. And I think the sentiment of fans throughout the area continues to grow as all of this is happening. And when the Phipps family sold to the DeQ family, then it was pretty well identified that the DeQ family would become the heirs, possibly to be the owners of the team. And so John DeQ and the people he was working with continued to try to attract a team. And I think the sentiment, as I say, of the whole community had a growing and strong support for a major league team.
Yeah, just to remind folks, and look, some of you were here, you remember it. I have to do it by studying, but John DeQ and his family buy the team on December 31st, 1984, and 30 days later he changes the name from the Bears to the Zephyrs. Holy cow! What was the reaction? And Ed and Jeff, if either one of you want to chime in on this, what was the reaction of the community when he did that? Besides bad.
Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, Jeff, thanks. I would tell you that my impression, thinking back to those days, it was not favorable. I think a lot of fans, Jeff, is that saying it fairly? Is that as politically correct as I can say it? I think a lot of people were damned angry about it. And, you know, the Denver Bears had such a nice tradition and reputation, and everything that was baseball in Denver for such a long time had the Denver Bears as the team. So I think it was, I think a lot of fans, even though they ultimately came out and supported the Zephyrs and went to the games, I think a lot of them were probably pretty disappointed that name change took place.
I would agree with you, Ed. I think the other thing too is really by the mid 80s, my feeling was that people have been teased a little bit with the big league prospect. And even though they liked the Bears and true baseball fans followed the Bears, I think Denver's perception of itself was changing at that point. The city was starting to think of it as a big league baseball city, even though the minor league team was still there. And the minor league team continued to draw very well, especially on some of those fireworks nights. But I think that was part of it, that they were disappointed in the name change, but they were also disappointed at this point that they weren't a big league city yet. And I think people were starting to think in those terms and saying, hey, when are we going to get a big league team? That's what we want.
Yeah. And of course, interestingly, if I believe John DeQ would say, he said then and would say even now, he changed the name to try to get away from that long-term sense this is a minor league team. I don't know quite how that rationale went, but it was, if I change the name, it's no longer associated with being a minor league team. Mm-hmm. And Robert Howsam, and this is, I've read this, and it may have even been from something that Roger wrote, that in hiring Robert Howsam Jr., this is Bob's son, who had been an executive with the Cincinnati Reds, to be general manager and chief baseball guy with the president and general manager of the Denver Zephyrs then. That brought a little bit of warmth back to the city, thinking that maybe they had a guy that would know baseball. And of course, Bob was still around. And so that probably helped. And I know from my discussions with Robert Howsam Jr., he thought if DeQ buys the team, he was probably in line to have a major job with this new team. So DeQ is now a player, because and for those who don't know, John and his family had made their money in downtown real estate, and that becomes a factor later on. But there is an effort by the Denver Baseball Commission, and I think we go back to Roger, but certainly you other two can talk about it. Tell me about the Denver Baseball Commission and how it eventually was unsuccessful, but tell me what they did and maybe what they did right, what they did wrong. One of my perceptions is they lacked money, and that kind of hurt them, but maybe that's not right. Roger, you want to start us off on that?
Sure. When Federico Pena announced that he would run for mayor of Denver, one of the things he identified was his efforts and support for a major league team. And he created the Denver Baseball Commission. And he asked Steve Kadish to be the chairman of that. And he and the members of the Denver Commission, I think, did a terrific job. And I think they were successful in many respects because they kept Denver in the forefront. They supported John DeQ or anybody else who was a potential owner of the team. And so they kept us really exposed. They brought in exhibition games, and they did a number of very, I think, good things to keep us kind of in the running. So that was in place, and it was in place in spring of 1990 when the National League announced that they would accept invitations from various cities for 2 new teams in the National League. And with that, John DeQ, with Neil Macy and Kathy Williams, and the people went to Governor Romer and said that with this in place, we need to be ready and answer those requirements that the National League set forth for any invitations that would go from any of the cities.
I want to go back a little bit to the 85, 86 thing. They didn't just fail. There was talk that there was going to be expansion then. And part of the reason they failed was there was no expansion. It didn't happen. However, had we been a candidate in 85 or 86, the perception was Peter Uberoth, the commissioner of baseball, didn't seem to like Denver a whole lot for some reason. So we may not have been successful for that reason. He kept saying some negative things. But as you get to 89, and certainly John DeQ is a player in this process, but if you all remember what was happening in the late 80s, this was not the best of times for Denver. And the financial strength of John and his family had dwindled some because his downtown real estate properties weren't doing as well, and the value of his real estate wasn't as good. And then when the National League finally announces, here's the criteria, what do they say the expansion fee is going to be? He expected 30, maybe $50 million, right?
Right.
That was the expectation. The knowing people, journalists thought it's going to be 50. I think the previous one had been 30. So what was the cost to buy in to the league then?
Well, the fee was $95 million. So you're right. All conditions, not only the price of the team, but I think the conditions in the real estate market and whatever was going on in Denver. But prior to that, when it was announced that the National League would expand, John, with some of his friends, including Neil Macy and Kathy Williams, did go to the governor, and the governor, after, and there's a whole story involved with this, but certainly with time, they did pass the bill. It was 1351 was the name of the bill, which established the way, or the procedure anyway, that we could move forward with the Stadium Authority and the Colorado Baseball Commission.
Yeah, let's just talk briefly about that. I don't know whether you all know Neil Macy's name or Kathy Williams' name. Neil certainly was active in some political things. Neil ended up helping, from what I've read, working with John DeQ to write that bill.
Right.
And Neil had another instance, which I will mention in a minute, which was how to finance the stadium. But what was needed was to establish for the area an organization that had legitimate clout, the Colorado Baseball Commission, to to be able to go out with the sanctioning of basically you said a 5-county area. I thought maybe it was a 6-county area that ended up voting. But then also the Metropolitan Baseball or the Stadium Commission, and that was to fulfill the requirement that they had a baseball controlled stadium, which even better would have been a baseball only stadium. And so those now become the challenges, attracting MLB here and getting a stadium. Is that right? And Kathy Williams, by the way, it cost her job. She wasn't even a huge baseball fan. She thought it was good for the area. Romer, there was a while there Romer was not so positive about baseball. And Kathy tells me she had the role of getting it through the House. It wasn't as challenging to get it through the Senate. That had been done. But Kathy had to clear 3 committees within a week. And she got 2 of them done. On a Friday morning, she had the vote for the 3rd committee. And she said, by the end of the day, I had to have this vote. So she thinks it's going to be 8-7 her way, but one person switches their vote. And Kathy told me that she talked to an older man who was pretty conservative, and his district definitely was conservative. And he said, Kathy, I can't vote. I can't vote for this. My district will hate me. And she said, you don't need to vote for it in the general vote. Just vote it out of committee so it can go to the floor of the House. And he did that. And that literally within hours came to be a very crucial point of all this. So it clears the House. And then Roger, tell me how that the Colorado Baseball Commission
they stayed with it.
Started going.
Well, thank goodness they stayed with it and cleared it, and that worked out. But it really set up the structure as to how we would move forward. And the National League really did us a big favor for all the cities that we're looking at, because they identified the requirements. There were 4 basic things that we had to face. And first of all was the stadium. And in our case, that meant a new stadium, although at the time we thought we could play at least a while at Mile High Stadium, which we did the first year. But in the long run, we had to make a commitment for the stadium, and that meant a vote that we had to take. So we had to get ready for that. Second thing is that we had to have enough community support to justify the team. And in our case, that meant a minimum of 20,000 season tickets had to be committed for. And so that meant a drive that we had to put together as well. The third item was we had to have major league owners that were acceptable to major leagues. And they wanted local ownership or regional ownership, with one person being responsible to work with Major League Baseball. And the fourth thing we've already talked about, but that was a price tag of $95 million that had to be there. And then the new owners also had to agree with the rules of the draft, how that would work. They get no television money for the first year. And obviously they had to have enough money to get a startup for all that was done. So that's a pretty heavy assignment, especially when they made the announcement that they would, within 3.5 months, those cities that were interested had to respond back to Major League Baseball as to where they stood. So we had a lot of work to do within a very short period of time.
Now you started out with the Metropolitan Baseball Stadium group, baseball group, but then Neil stepped down from heading up the Colorado Baseball Commission, and you went over to head that up, right? And
That's
Ed,
correct.
I think you were on that committee too.
Well, John was our first chairman of the Stadium Authority, and then Ray Baker followed him. And those two have done just a tremendous job. Both of them did.
I would have loved to have had Ray Baker here today, but I mean, he didn't have too much notice, I know. But Ray Baker gave us a wonderful program along with John Lehigh and first name of Ed, what's Gleason's first? Tom Gleason?
Tom Gleason.
Tom.
Yeah.
And they gave us a wonderful program for my class 2 years ago. It was great at Coors Field. And think about it. Then the football was added, and Ray Baker is still leading that group 30 years later, and as I think most people think he's done a pretty damn good job.
Well, absolutely. No question about it. He tremendous service, not only for sports, but for the city of Denver.
Okay. And Ed, hold on one thing, because it's on my mind. One person we didn't give credit to in the legislature was Sam Simplizio from Grand Junction. And Sam Simplizio, either one of you, anybody can comment, but had baseball connections too. So Sam not only helped drum up support in the legislature, but Sam also kind of worked the baseball side also. Is that correct, Roger?
You're exactly right. Sam was involved and had a lot of connections in baseball. And he and Larry Varnell were the co-chairs of the Colorado Baseball Commission.
Okay. And Ed, tell me, you were on the Colorado Baseball Commission. What did you do for that?
My role really, to kind of back up a little bit, I had met Steve Kadish and Don Hinchy back and worked with them during the days of the Denver Baseball Commission. And then I had the privilege of working with Don and Roger on the 1990 Final Four. And that kind of evolved me into a situation where I got a chance to work really kind of special projects with the Colorado Baseball Commission, working with Don and Roger and, on various things that they had planned and trying to assist them as I could.
Yeah, and I know you've got a story or two along those lines. So you had miscellaneous duties as deemed appropriate, but you also then had the experience of working with those other groups. You mentioned a name that I don't know real well personally, but Sam Simplizio has died, as Don Hinchy, who I think was a real important part of both committees. So
Right.
One of my goals here is to at least mention some of the key names of people who did things. And of course, the Houseums are now being helpful with their baseball connections. And it's just important to the history of Denver to know some of these folks' names. So what was the first order of business? You've got 4 things you need to do. And I know that probably 3 of them were real hard.
well, the campaign, of course, to get the season tickets had to get started immediately. And that, I think, with some of the things we've already talked about with the sentiment in town, the people wanted to make their commitments, and they did in big numbers. One of the stories about that I always thought was kind of interesting. Some people were concerned the fact that the Broncos dominated the sports scenes in Denver. And some people said, well, they're not going to support Major League Baseball because they wanted the sole credit anyway, or visibility anyway in the sports community. That proved to be completely wrong. When we got close on our season ticket drive, I had a call from John Elway's Motor Company. I think it was Rod Butcher was his name, but anyway, he was running the company. And he called to say that they wanted to buy some tickets. And the fact of the matter was that we went out and we had a visit with him and what have you. And they bought enough season tickets to push us over the 20,000 mark, what we needed. And eventually, as I think you know, we actually had about 28,000 season ticket commitments by the time Major League Baseball came to visit.
Which was,
I thought that was terrific to get that support from the Broncos and the
Yeah.
entire sports community in Denver.
So that ends up being a big success. I mean, I expect that was more than MLB expected, and they had to be very happy with you on that.
Oh, they were. That's great.
All right. So
You want another story?
Yeah. Well,
well, things were going pretty well, and after the vote passed and our season ticket thing was going.
Yeah, we got to talk about the vote. I wanted to take some time on the vote. We're not just going to assume the vote.
I'll tell you a story about ownership. In that we would make an announcement every time something good happened, and we had good prospects with the process of the season tickets, as I say, but also we get some of the commitments from some of the even minority owners of the team would come aboard and what have you. And every time we'd have a press conference, and we'd go over to the United Bank Center down in the atrium, and we'd make an announcement. And I can remember we had some of the, when Linda Alvarado and her family joined, and some of the others. Matter of fact, KOA and Rocky Mountain News at that time, and it became the Post, of course. But every time, 5 or 6 times, we'd have these press announcements. We'd say that something else good had happened. And Dick Connor, who some of you will remember, great sports writer, well-known, who's now passed. But at any rate, he'd come over to me every time, and we'd announce something happening, and he'd shake his head and he'd say, "You don't have a chance." And we'd laugh and talk about it and what have you. And we'd another 2 or 3 weeks, and we'd give another press announcement. One time, so we thought we had a big announcement, and we did. We announced that the Coors family, Peter Coors, was going to make a commitment to be involved, and he didn't want to be an owner, but he was going to have naming rights, and he was going to support the team in other ways. And Dick Connor came over to me after that announcement, and he looked at me and he said, "Now you have a chance." And by George, he was right. It sent a message throughout our community, and it sent the message to people in the National League and in Major League Baseball that finally we had regional support in a financial sense to make us a legitimate contender. And I've always thought that Coors really didn't get the support or the acknowledgement that they deserved, because when they came aboard, it was a whole new ballgame.
I can see that would have given some credibility. I'm going to skip over because we got a lot to do, but I want to mention something that happened with the ownership, and then spend maybe a minute on how it evolved. Ownership became a big deal here, a problem. And there was a time when it looked like everything was okay after the vote for the stadium, and we could talk about that briefly. But so DeQ was the first presumed owner, and he ended up backing out when the money got higher and perhaps his finances got lower. And after a long search, I'm summarizing this, but a couple of people from Youngstown, Ohio, end up being the central contact people, and a guy named Mickey Monis and John Antonucci, right? And so Monis, by my memory, was going to contribute about $20 million, and Antonucci maybe $1 million. And then Steve Earhart was a local guy who was their contact point. Monis had made his money with the Farmore drug company. He's the guy. It looks like things are okay. And then shortly before we need to make the final agreement with the National League, Monis is charged with 128, I think, felony count indictment. And so all of a sudden, he's gone. I mean, because he's going to be I don't think he had been convicted at that point. I think it was just charged, but clearly NL is not going to take it, and he probably didn't have the money. So a key guy on all this is Paul Jacobs, and Paul Jacobs died almost 2 years ago. I mean, very close to that. But Jacobs was kind of the guy, and we're skipping some of this stuff, but Jacobs literally told me, he said, "So I wrote a $20 million check out to float as support while we could find owners, and we had a week to do it." And then Eddie says, "I didn't have $20 million, but this was just a holding place." And he worked really hard. Maybe other people did, and just say the people that stepped up at that point in time to put us over the hump.
Well, yes, I had a similar experience as you did prior to Paul's passing about the details of that. And yes, it was a moment, a very brief period of time, thank goodness, that Paul kind of saved the day, and that we had to continue to have legitimate ownership of the team, or the National League, of course, was going to look elsewhere. But when that happened, as you described, Paul had to had the confidence that he could pull it off. But he came back to Denver, as he told me, and he made an arrangement with Jerry McMorris and the Monfords family and Orrin Benton. And so they put together to buy them out, and they assumed, of course, their roles as we moved ahead anyway to do that. But if that had not happened in a very short period of time, we probably would not have had a legitimate owner for the team.
And as we know, and I've read numerous times, when a franchise is awarded, it's not awarded to a town; it's awarded to the owners.
That's right.
So they're the trust here. Now, there are some great stories about passing the bond, the stadium district stuff, but I want to spend some time on one story and then go on. So I'll just say in brief, Neil Macy came up with the idea of 1 cent per $10. He thought that would be a way to fund the stadium. And most people thought we'd never fund it. One part of the brilliance seemed to be to have the bond referendum like August 6th of that year, something like that, where there would be low turnout. And because they thought that the people that would vote for it would be more likely to come out than the people would vote against it, as opposed to putting it in a general election cycle. And it turned out to pass, 56-44, despite most people's predictions it wouldn't. And that was very important to getting the team. So tell us about the visit, and then we'll proceed into what happened after the visit.
Oh, well.
And Ed, you certainly need to chime in on this.
Well, Ed and Don Hinchy were heavily involved in the visit. You're talking about the time that Major League Baseball's committee wanted to come to Denver, and they gave us pretty strict instructions that this was to be a business meeting, that they just wanted to conduct the business affairs with no campaigning or other things involved. When we heard that, we thought this was our chance, and we weren't going to do it in a minimal basis, but we really had to do everything we could to show our stuff. So at any rate, they came to town, the committee came to town, we greeted them at the airport, we put them in helicopters and gave them a flyover of the whole area, landing at Mile High Stadium there. So we got out and kicked the dirt and walked around there and took some good pictures. After that, we put them in cars and we went to the governor's mansion, where Governor Romer had a very classy and nice lunch for it. We were the time zone without a team was one of our campaign things. And we got support from all of the governors in the neighboring states. So they attended the luncheon too, and they were there for the visit.
Cool.
So they really met and socialized with them as well. And then after lunch, once again, we piled back into the limousines, or the cars anyway. We drove them around downtown Denver, and Hinchy and Henderson and the others had created a parade route. It was lined with people holding up signs and placards and what have you, welcoming them there to Denver. So we wandered around in a very precarious way, but anyway, we wanted to see all the fans who were there to greet them. And we parked in front of the United Bank Center there on Broadway with the idea that they would have to walk from Broadway through the atrium, up the escalator, and on eventually to the elevators, which would take them to the 21st floor where the business meeting was to take place. Well, in the atrium, all of the fans had gathered, and they began to sing and cheer and welcome all these guests that came. And of course, they were dumbfounded. They didn't realize that this was going to be their little meeting. But it turned out Norm Jones was the MC for a little program we had, and he officially welcomed them, and they sang "Take Me Out to the Ball Game" and what have you. And as we rode up the escalators, they were moved. There was no question about it, and they remarked about it later. But one of them, I think he was the president, the representative from the Pirates. He said, "They don't treat me like this in Pittsburgh." It was special. So from there, they went up and the business meeting took place. And that's when they were convinced, thank goodness, with the presentation from John McHale and Paul Jacobs and and the owners that we had the money, we were financially positioned, and we felt that was kind of the turning point anyway, when Denver was really in line to get the team.
Well, I am now. I'm going to ask Ed, but I just want to say something. You guys took a risk here.
Yes, a big risk.
Don't do this. And then Ed, you had some involvement in this event, right?
Yeah, we. I think that the day before, if memory serves me correctly, Don Hinchy and I met with Roger, and then we had a discussion with Steve Earhart, who had been, I think, and Jeff, you may remember this. I think Earhart was the president of the World Basketball League before joining the effort with the folks from Youngstown. But Steve Earhart had made it very clear. He said, "Look, this group that's coming in here tomorrow has stipulated that they don't want to see any fan demonstrations. And this is, as Roger said, a business meeting. So it's going to be strictly business. And you guys want to put on a presentation and a fan rally in the lobby of the United Bank in the atrium there. And I'll clean it up for the folks here, but Earhart stipulated you better be effing right. And and it certainly, I think, the biggest fear that I had, Roger mentioned the fact that the folks had left had come from the governor's mansion. I was on the phone, one of those old big, like size of a brick type cell phones with Alan Bossert, who was with the group at the governor's mansion. Alan and I trying to coordinate on time to make sure we could get the folks from the committee to the atrium before people who were there on their lunch hour in the atrium were going to be heading back to their offices. And I'll tell you what, Norm Jones had that crowd whipped up, and people, screaming, "We want baseball." And
that was great.
It was terrific. I walked in right behind it, and Roger, wasn't it Katie Feeney? Katie was part of that group, right?
Yes, I believe she was here.
Yeah, and I remember walking through right behind her, and she was visibly moved by it. So we felt good. I felt like, okay, this could have gone a couple of different ways. Thankfully, it went the right way.
That's great. Anything you got to say there, Jeff?
I was at the atrium for that, and I remember all that Roger and Ed were talking about. The one thing I remember is Bill White was a member of that group, the former player, and somebody yelled, "Bring us baseball, Bill," and his mouth went just like that. I mean, he was just stunned for a split second. I think maybe somebody had the audacity to say that, but I think that, these guys were fairly nondescript, and that somebody actually remembered him or understood he was on the committee or he was a former player. But I just remember that. I thought, okay, we've got their attention.
Yeah. One thing that you guys have alluded to, but I'll bet I certainly wouldn't have remembered. You keep saying National League, and you're saying, why National League? Well, at this time, American League had 14 teams, the National League had 12. So this was a National League expansion to sort of catch up to the American League. And if you do the math, that brings it up to 28 teams. And then, of course, 2 more teams were admitted a few years later, and then that's where we stand. And I want this to be brief because I want to talk about the first season or two. Tell me the feeling when they made the announcement and you were in.
You're talking about the announcement, July 5th?
Yeah, I presume that was there a little bit of uncertainty before that, or did you absolutely know?
Well, when we knew he was coming to town, we sensed and knew that it was the right announcement. It was going to be fine.
All right. Okay. So the announcement was anticlimactic to you?
Well, no, I think fans erupted, of course, and the coverage was tremendous. Jeff can talk about that as well, I think, but there was no question about it. It was long overdue, 33 years, as they say, we waited, but it was terrific. And I think it was terrific too, because not only the vote was in favor, but the sports community had come together to really put this together. So many people were involved, so many good things happened, and so many things, as even you've touched on, it wouldn't have happened if certain things hadn't have been just right. So with with that kind of support, I think it really was climatic.
Yeah, what strikes me here in this whole thing was, one, how people pulled together, and two, how a couple times it almost unraveled. I mean, it was delicate at times, and yet, you know, for me, looking from the outside, this did make Denver Major League. Now you had three of the big sports, the two biggest at the time, certainly, and basketball, and now Denver was a big league team or city. Ed, Jeff, comments about the announcement?
Well, from my... Go ahead,
sorry.
Jeff.
I was just going to say, I thought it was a pretty good birthday present because my birthday was the next day.
Just for you.
Yeah.
Ed?
Yeah, I agree. It was a great birthday present for all of us. I think, you know, we, as Roger said, when we learned that Bill White was coming to town, we had a pretty good inclination that, you know, this was going to be a very positive sign. But, you know, I remember that day very well, and it was spectacular. And, you know, I think for a lot of baseball fans, you know, and Roger, I can't remember where we had that meeting. It was one of the downtown hotels where we unveiled some things that day, and you know, people spoke and they were handing out hats and things like that. But, you know, it was thrilling to me to see not only the folks that had worked so hard, Roger and Don and everybody on the baseball commission and all the good people who'd done all that hard work. What was encouraging to me was to see, and it's a rarity today, it wasn't a political thing. It wasn't so much, you know, Republican, Democrat. You had people working together to make this happen. And because they love baseball. That was it.
Yeah, I love the story, and that's why I want to record this, you know, so that it's sort of for the archives. I know that there's a lot of literature out there. I wanted to talk about how the team was kind of put together and that process. I don't think we have enough time because I definitely want to talk about what that first season was like. So I apologize for not going to, you know, some of the process of, it must have been amazing having that first group together. But I would like to, if anybody has anything to say about that first team in spring training, where people may know others from other teams, but you've got minor leaguers there. And a story that I heard was that Baylor actually, our new manager, actually had them put on name tags so they could know who each other was. Now, I don't know whether that's true, but anybody want to comment on what spring training was like?
Well, the thing I remember most, and we've all touched on it, was Denver had been a Broncos town forever. And of course, that first spring training, every possible media outlet was there, every TV station, all the newspapers. I'm not talking just Denver, but regional as well, all the radio stations. And I remember after the first practice, Baylor's there and everybody gathers around them. And the first question from whoever the reporter was, he said, "Coach, what'd you think about today?" And everybody that knows Don Baylor knows that Don could just freeze you with that glare that he could give you. And he goes, let's get one thing straight here. I'm the manager of the ball club. Okay. You got football coaches and we have coaches on our team, but I'm the manager. So either refer to me the manager or call me Don or whatever you want to do. But, you know, whatever you do, don't call me coach or, you know, he'd probably strangle you.
Okay. This is a great story. Ed, Roger, either one of you, because then we'll go off to opening day and stuff like that.
Well, opening day, of course, was terrific. Here, lots of stories about it. Excuse me, opening day in Tucson for first spring training day is the day I'll remember as well, because we played the Giants. We had a flyover there as well, which was terrific. we had music before the Tucson group anyway sang the national anthem. I don't know if you remember that, Jeff, but it was a special day, and like the game against the Giants, of course, went well. But that too was a good memory anyway. The team played well, and of course, I think we won the game. I don't remember the score, but that was fun as well as opening day here, which I know you want to talk about as well.
Well, I'll just say real quick, you know, at spring training, superstar players very rarely travel to play games, and certainly from the Phoenix area, you know, 2-hour bus ride down to Tucson. Barry Bonds wasn't coming, although they asked Barry Bonds and they said, hey, this is really big. Will you come and play in the game? Barry Bonds actually showed up and played a couple innings that day.
Wow. Wow. Ed, anything?
You know, I wasn't there for that spring training, but I can tell you from talking to friends that were there that it was something that it was a long time in pursuit. And I think everybody that was there in Tucson that first year just lapped it up. It was, you know, High Corbett Field down there, a nice little ballpark. And I think that it really was impressive from the standpoint, like Jeff had pointed out, this is not just, you know, media coming from Denver or people coming from Denver. It was a regional deal. There were people going down there from Wyoming and Nebraska and, you know, South Dakota and, you know, all the states, certainly adjoining Colorado. It was a big regional deal.
Yeah. I want to acknowledge that many of you probably attended that. I was an outsider at the time, but I went down with my friend Matt Klaus, who's on the call. And just as an outsider, the intimacy of that reminded us, you know, now it's 1993. Mac and I started going down to spring training, maybe 81. Sometimes you felt fairly close to the players. That had kind of gone away. There were bigger complexes. People, you could get pretty damn close to those Rockies players, and we thought that was slick. And that was either the first or second year, and I don't remember which. I've got a question, Carol. I'm going to call on you in just a second. I want quick memories of the opening day, and then I'm going to open it up for questions the last 10 minutes. And also tell my class, or Brian's in my class, he's going to open up our website in a minute or two. We're going to meet for 30 minutes afterwards on a different Zoom call just to wind up our class, so you can certainly, I want you guys to join that class or that Zoom meeting right after this. And all right, any comments? Roger, Jeff, Ed, we are running out of time, but just tell me that opening day must have, let's talk about the home opening day rather than the road opening day.
Well, I'll start. I just remember, of course, Eric Young hits the home run in the bottom of the first, leading things off. I found all this later because John Vanderwall was playing left field for the Expos that day. Marquise Grissom was in center. Vanderwall ended up being a Rocky, and I got to know Marquise Grissom pretty well during his playing time with the Braves. But in talking to both of them, the thing they remember chasing Eric Young's ball down as it went out into left field and over the fence, they could feel the field moving, because if you remember at Mile High Stadium, the left field grandstands were on that hydraulic system that moved in and out for football. They could actually feel from the crowd, the field was vibrating. And they got to the fence, watched the ball go over, and I remember they both told me this story later. Marquise turned to Vanderwall and he said, "This isn't going to be our day."
Roger, you were the first employee of the Rockies. Any comment?
Oh gosh, the excitement and the emotion really of the crowd and everything there. You just can't help but remember that and feel that. But one of the things I remember as well is the reaction from the players, not only the day of the game, but afterwards. It was just unbelievable how they felt welcome in there. And two of the players that I remember, because I had occasion, I picked them up at the airport one time, and I took David Mead and Galarraga, and we had a little time before they had to report and what have you. And I said, do you want to do anything? And they both agreed. They wanted to go to the ballpark and see what it was like. So we went there, and thank goodness I knew the guys that were there, and they let us onto the field. And, and they both went down. Galarraga went to home plate, and he kicked the dirt, and he looked around. And Meade walked to the mound and looked around. And on the other one was Joe Girardi. I can't believe. But that first day, of course, was extra special. But I think the welcome they got from the Denver fans that opening day and then in the season to come was just something that I'll never forget.
And I'll bet they never forgot it either. I mean, because that had to be, I so wish I'd been around. Ed, do you want to make one comment before we get a couple questions?
Sure. I think Roger hit it. The emotion, the excitement, 80,000 people. And I remember one of the first thoughts I had, my wife and I had stayed the night before at that hotel that was right next to Mile High Stadium. And we wanted to take it all in. And I remember people getting there so early that day for that game. And I can't remember start time, but I will tell you that we saw people walking by the hotel. It seemed like 8:30 in the morning trying to, get positioned over there. And the one thought that went through my mind after the anthem, I looked around in that ballpark, and again, we're talking 80,000 people. And for those people, I was thinking back to the days of the Denver Baseball Commission, the Colorado Baseball Commission, and all the time that had gone by waiting for a team to get here. And all those naysayers from the National League and from around baseball, and some from the media who said, this town will never support a team. And I thought, here's your 80,000 support right here.
It must have been so sweet. I'm going to go to questions, and I had sworn I was going to end this at 11:30. We'll extend it 10 minutes if we have enough to talk about. There's so much stuff that I didn't get to, and I wish I had. The first question I have was online and on chat. What were the other teams? The Florida Marlins also get a franchise. Who are the other ones that were in contention, or were there no other ones in close contention?
You mean when we got a team?
Yeah, who else was? I know there were a bunch of cities.
Okay, Florida, of course, had 2 or 3 sites that were in contention. Phoenix was in contention. I think even Buffalo at one time was talked about a possible team.
Yeah, they were part of that group, but my guess is even then that Buffalo had sort of just didn't have the firepower. But they could have put two places in Florida. I mean,
that was a real concern at one point, because Miami was a given. That they had the money and everything from right off the bat. So we thought they were going to get one franchise. And yes, there was serious consideration for 2 teams going to Florida.
Okay. Carol Steele, can you unmute yourself?
I'm unmuted.
All right. Good.
I've always thought that $95 million buy-in fee was just an extraordinary amount of money. That's just a side comment that I would make. I'm more familiar with the Tampa Bay Rays story, and so I'm so pleased that you all have been with us today to tell us much, much more about how it all came to pass that we got the Rockies here, and thank you for that. Again, thinking about the Rays, one of the reasons it said that they were passed over early on was that they had historical issues with race in the community, and that they at one point thought that they were going to get the San Francisco Giants to come, but that Bill White, who was the National League commissioner at that point, put the kibosh on it, because when he had been a player, he couldn't get a room in Tampa Bay because of his color. I'm curious if there were any hitches in the get along of that sort in trying to put this franchise together.
Did that ever come up, Roger?
Well, that's an interesting story and interesting about Tampa Bay, which I did not know. I was never privy to any real concerns. I do know, of course, we had players and others that we didn't make any difference to us. Matter of fact, Don Bader being our first manager, I think squashed any concerns anyway for that time. I think we always had real good support. I think a number of the players wanted to come here. Matter of fact, early in our history, we had a wonderful program where we brought back a number of the players that played in the Negro Leagues. I don't know if you or anybody else was able to attend that, but that was a tremendous success. And matter of fact, lots of good stories. You could build a program just around that. Jay Sanford, who's a local historian, helped us immensely to track some of the players that were still alive. And unfortunately, some of those have passed away now.
Yeah.
But that was an important event. But back to answer your question, I don't know of any problems that we had in that regard.
And in fact, you had one of the old stars here, Byron Johnson, who had settled in Park Hill. Bill?
Yeah, I wonder, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I wonder if Roger can talk just briefly about the location of Coors Field and the battle of getting it downtown instead of out in God knows where.
Great question.
That is a good question, because at the time, there was lots of controversy and input as to where the stadium to be located. And you think of that today, it's really interesting. We had identified probably 4 or 5 sites that we would evaluate and decide what to do. One of the sites was where Pepsi is now located, but that they had some opposition, and including some people with the school, with Metro, that was very concerned about the parking there and how that would work out. Late in the process, Jack Vickers, matter of fact, wanted us to go to a site that was outside of metropolitan Denver as well, which didn't get a whole lot of attention, but it was under consideration to a small extent. The site that we eventually identified anyway and came to be the site for Coors Field is an interesting story in itself, because working with the railroads, and that site was available, but it seemed to be awkward with the configuration of space. So we did have to get a couple of joining properties anyway that had to be purchased and worked out to make it happen. But that was a big consideration, and the stadium board, of course, put a lot of effort into that. We had some interesting responses, and when we checked out some of the sites, as you may recall, one of the sites also was just northeast of 23rd and Welton, that some people wanted to go there, but that involved a residential area that wouldn't have been really very adequate anyway. The existing site, I always thought was interesting that it did a lot for lower downtown area. Good story is Mark Freeman, who was a pitcher with the Yankees, very successful businessman in town. And after the announcement was made as to where we would go, to 20th and Blake Street, he came to a meeting, or I heard him remark, he says, "Do you realize what you have done for the lower downtown area?" And we all kind of looked at each other and laughed and said no. But if you look at that today and realize that was one of the factors in the tremendous growth and the success of the lower downtown area. So it was an interesting process. Thank goodness it worked. And even people from out of state often remark about what a great location it is to the downtown area.
Yeah. I want to tell one quick thing about Ray Baker, who ended up being responsible for that stadium when I had somebody ask me if he'd ever thought about reorienting it, why did they orient it that way or not look at downtown? Baker basically said we only had 2 ways we could do it, the way it is now or exactly 180 degrees opposite because of the shape of the field. He said, but since most ballparks, maybe all ballparks, have their main entrance at at behind home plate, that would make people walk way out of the way, or else we would have had to put our main entrance in center field. And he said that didn't make any sense to us. So he felt that it was a pretty easy decision. And of course that, I don't know, I can't imagine had they done it the other way. Kurt Wells, who worked on the project, you got a comment, Kurt? You helped sell the stadium issue as a part-time employee or a loaned executive, and you met with companies to try to convince them. So we don't have a lot of time, but you want to comment, Kurt? You're muted, Kurt. Can you unmute?
Okay, I thought you unmuted me. Okay. Yeah, I wanted to mention that I work closely with Roger and would go around speaking to corporations and organizations, trying to sell the financial benefits that we would bring to Denver. And, you know, the Chamber of Commerce had put together some numbers that were really conservative. We blew those numbers way out of the water. But everywhere I would speak, I constantly heard, why do we support something when we're such a Broncos town that in 3 years we're going to have an empty stadium sitting there? And, you know, that was just what I heard everywhere I went. And I was speaking with Bob Housam at the Elitch's Crocodero, and Bob was fabulous speaker. He was just so good. And we had a number of people after Bob was done telling stories about what he had done for the community in Cincinnati and St. Louis when he'd been GMs there. People stood up in the crowd and they said, I always thought this was a Broncos town and I was going to vote no, but after hearing you speak, I'm definitely voting yes. And so it really made you feel good, like you pointed out earlier, to see the success this has been after you heard all those people say this will be gone in a year or two, you know.
And it worked out. Well, thanks for your effort. I want to, I've got two questions we're going to have before we end, and a comment from Paul Parker, if he wants to comment. Paul was an early employee of the Rockies, and he had multiple duties, but among them was historian of the Rockies. He's now historian emeritus. And Paul, do you want to comment on anything? And you're muted too, Paul. Okay. With the two setups, I can't find Paul, but I thought he was here. Okay, we'll go to Alan Rosenberg's question, if you'll unmute, Alan.
To Roger Kinney. On whose account did Paul Jacobs float that check?
Well,
that's his personal check, by the way.
To his story that when he told me, it was his personal check. He and Steve Kurtz, as a matter of fact, Steve did a lot of the financial planning or forecasting, and he and Paul were the two that supposedly wrote those checks.
Is that it, Alan?
What's that?
Is that your only question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I knew some of Paul's friends, and I wondered if they were the ones who were in the tank for that.
No, he just wrote it knowing he could never pay it. You know what the worst that could happen would be it bounced for $20 million. Fran Frazier, if you'll unmute, Fran.
Oh, well, I've been here since '74, and I can remember in the '80s when they were arguing, should we or shouldn't we have a baseball team? And they would say, oh, Denver's not a baseball city. Oh, nobody would go. But yet at the same time, they'd say, wasn't the attendance at some of the Zephyrs seasons, the whole season, actually had a bigger attendance than a number of professional teams, even some that were in the playoffs?
I don't know. Anybody know the answer to that?
Well, there were times, yes, the Zephyrs drew very well. And of course, the Bears drew very well, even going way back when they were the Yankees farm team. But it was up and down. They worked hard at it. Jim Burris, as general manager, used to do a lot of things anyway to promote good attendance. So we had a good story to tell the other teams, and we used that to some extent, even comparing it to some of the major league teams that did not have good attendance. She's right.
And I'll go back even further. One of the things we just covered in our class was the 50s, while a great time for baseball players, and especially incoming black stars, was a very low time for baseball attendance. And I'm sure some of those Denver Bear teams had more attendance than places like Pittsburgh or Chicago. The Cubs had terrible attendance at the time, and it was not a good, these teams were bad, and they were bad year after year.
But it was attendance even in the 80s. That was much better here.
Yeah, and yes, in a smaller stadium too. So we are at the end. We got 3 minutes before I'm going to have to close it down. Any other questions or any comments by Jeff or Ed or anybody else?
I would just say, the one thing people ask me is, what do you remember? And I just remember those crowds, and it'll never happen again, because there is no stadium like Mile High Stadium that any city that's being considered for expansion would use for a couple of years until they had a baseball park built. I just remember in those early days at Mile High, my partner at the time, Wayne Hagan, and I would joke, there's nobody here. There'd be 50,000 people there that night, as opposed to 70 or 75,000. And that's the way it was every night. And you just think the fans went nuts then, and it's still a love affair with baseball to this day.
I wanted to say too that my husband and I had tickets beginning in about 1977, and for the Bears, the Zephyrs, and we were so excited, of course, when everything came together. And we had followed the process because we knew Steve Kadish and other people. And I appreciate this great review. It's been just a great presentation.
Thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.
I'd like
John Roeder, it's got to be a quick question with a quick answer. You're muted, John. Can you unmute?
Again, thank you for this presentation. I mean, I got chills going through me just remembering the beginning. And just real quick, the groundbreaking ceremony was fabulous, but, just a personal experience that just gave me chills. My wife and I were at a party, and we befriended this couple. Anyway, this gentleman was an architect at HOK, who obviously built the stadium. Lo and behold, a few days later, I'll cut it short here, see him again, he gives me a seat, a Rocky Coalfield seat, which was just a thrill, and he gave us an invitation to go through while they were constructing it. Remember, my son was 3 months old, had him on my back, just going through the stadium tour. So anyway, this was great, guys.
Thank you for that. And to mention something about Coors Field, which most of you probably know, it's the third oldest ballpark in the National League. It's probably sixth oldest in all of baseball. It still looks terrific. That's from an outsider. You can take civic pride in how that worked. There's a wonderful story about the building of Coors Field and how they had to build it backwards because of a piece of property they didn't own at home plate. I mean, there's so much we could cover. I'm going to thank our three panelists, Ed, Jeff, and especially Roger. Thank you so much. We could talk longer, but I promise to stop the talk. I hope you've enjoyed it. And thanks again to Ollie and Saber. So goodbye, folks, and get through the pandemic.
Thank you, Greg.
So long.
Thanks a lot, Greg.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, bye.
Thanks,
and
Rick.
people from my class, please sign in for the last 15 minutes or so on the other Zoom website. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Good, great course.